Welcome to an episode of In Swine Versation on Swine Web and Swine TV. Next Generation Biosecurity with Scott D. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Hey, Jim. Good to be back in the Swine Web and participating in the Swine Versation. I like it a lot.
Well, thanks for being our first guest. I know you have a very timely topic you brought to light, a completely new idea on the next generation biosecurity. What are some of the basics on this topic?
Next generation biosecurity is an idea that Dr. Gordon Sprunk and I developed as we were putting together our special issue on feed risk, which I think we'll talk about today. But it's really challenging the industry to take biosecurity first at the sow farm level to a new height, to go beyond mechanical, to go beyond aerosol, and also to include feed. So it becomes a comprehensive approach across multiple routes, multiple risk factors, raising the bar, so to speak.
So how would you organize routes of transmissions and risks for sow farms?
Yeah, this is a good start. So to make it easy for me, I always considered direct routes and indirect routes. Direct routes are pigs, so infected pigs, let's say PRRS infected pigs, or PRRS contaminated semen. So virus coming from a direct source, the animal. In contrast, you've got indirect routes, which are risks where the virus can move from place to place on non-living entities, such as mechanical transmission, i.e. trucks, people, supplies. Aerosol transmission, obviously, airborne currents, and feed that we've talked a little bit about in the past, and I think it's like the next level that we need to ascend to. So I always break it into direct and indirect, pigs and semen, and basically everything else below, mostly obviously all non-living vehicles to move the virus around.
So feed is the key.
It's one of the keys. This is one of the messages here is this is a comprehensive approach. You need to have a plan for all of these risk factors. If you just rely on a handful of them, you're going to get burned through one of the routes you're not paying attention to. So feed is the newest one, but it's not any more important than, say, aerosol or mechanical or animal risk. They're all important.
We need to focus on the big picture. So with that being said, in today's swine industry, where do we stand biosecurity wise?
Yeah, so there's a lot of variation across the industry, at least in the US. I can say you've got some systems or companies that I've worked with that have a great, let's just say, they got the direct routes covered. So they've got a negative source of animals, they've got a negative source of semen, they've got testing, quarantining, and all that stuff for that. And they do a great job. So they can kind of cross that off as long as they continue to test and monitor. And some of those companies then also have, I would think, most of them that I've seen, a pretty good handle on mechanical risk. So they remember the old snowball from hell paper we did where we took PRRS in a snowball, we stuck it under a wheel well of a vehicle, and we drove it around the countryside, and we showed that it could be moved by vehicles, it could be moved by boots, it could be moved by supplies. And so that kind of drove the industry to put together things like truck washes or truck sanitation programs, D&D rooms for supply entry, downtime, and disinfection rooms, and say boot benches and things for entry for people into a shower and shower out facility. So it kind of raised awareness that the virus is out there in the landscape, and specifically, and particularly in cold weather, it's very easy to move around, just walking it, driving it from place to place. So I think overall the U.S. industry is pretty good at the direct routes and the mechanical routes. Okay, where we start to separate is when we start looking at aerosol and feed. Before I go down that road, Jim, do you have any thoughts about the mechanical side? Do you want to delve a little deeper into that, or the pig side? What do you think?
Well, let's start with the mechanical side.
Okay.
So where are producers today with that? Like, are people from the pig barns you're going into, what are you seeing? And are people adapting to the evolution of what needs to continue to happen? Or is it with the boot wash and everything, we're doing this already? We don't want to look at this anymore. What are you seeing from that side?
You know, before we did the snowball study, it was real common for people to walk out the door and bang on the feed bin and walk right back in the barn. That behavior's changed, I'd say, for the majority of the modern pork production companies that I've dealt with. You know, once you shower into the facility, you simply don't do that anymore. In the earlier days, there was really not a lot of attention on the role of trucks and the mechanical, the vehicle, as we call it, the vehicle to move virus from place to place, and really nothing on supplies. So for example, when I was in practice in the late 80s, I would go to a farm that had a shower in unit, but you'd walk in the entryway and you'd see on the floor a lot of dirt, a lot of snow, it wasn't a clean area, and supplies were sitting that had just come into that doorway on the floor, and they would just get passed right into the office, i.e. the clean side of the farm, through the pass-through window without any type of intervention. So nobody understood that floor surface, that entryway in the farm, could be contaminated through just foot traffic of people coming in, especially in cold weather. And so that's kind of how we set the study up, as we modeled that. And we showed that, yeah, if you've got virus in that spot on the farm and you've got boxes, be it styrofoam, metal, cardboard, whatever we look, plastic, they could contact the floor, get contaminated, and you get passed right into the farm pass-through window onto the clean side, this is the side of the farm after you shower. So obviously this was all bypassing the shower system. And that really raised awareness to this risk of mechanical transmission. And I'm really glad you want to drill down on that, because that was kind of like the turning point where people started to pay attention outside of just pigs and semen. So that was the old snowball from hell. And that's how the industry responded. Boot benches, D&D rooms, shower in, shower outs, those types of fundamental things we take for granted now on a farm.
What about the pig side?
Well, I think the pig side is very well handled now. There's farms have specific quarantine facilities where pigs come in, they're tested several times before they enter the farm. In the old days, you used to have the quarantine like a few yards across the farm space, which I think is a tremendous risk, because you're going back and forth all the time now. Most of the modern facilities I see now have an on-site quarantine that's part of the farm, but it's its own airspace. It's its own entry space. It's got its own pit. Especially in a filtered farm, this quarantine area is filtered too, separately from the main farm. So it's connected. It's in the same footprint of the building, so to speak, but it's a completely separate space that you have to follow protocols to get in. And so I think that's much safer than this offsite quarantine that everyone was arguing. Well, it's got to be 10 meters away. It's got to be 100 meters away. Nobody really knew anything. It was just a swag. It's a lot more refined. And I think, from our experiences in Pipestone, I think we might have had one or two times we can think of in many, many decades where the animals have actually been the source of the virus. And we caught them because we had this protocol with this specific quarantine. So I think that can be easily taken off the table. The other thing on the pig side is the semen. And the good thing about boar studs these days, because of the work Darwin Reichs has done with daily testing using blood swabs of all the boars that are collected that day, and the 1-day PCR turnaround that we've got now, you can basically take semen off the table, because you're testing your collected boars every day and you're getting immediate results, and you can make a decision whether to ship that semen or not. So to me, the direct routes are really easy. And I must give a shout out to the seed stock companies too. They do a really good job. And they're trying real hard to test their sources and making sure they're free as well. So we've really gone a long way on that. And to me, that's not an issue anymore. It's what's next after that we have to focus on.
So we've talked about the topic a little bit. People are still probably going to ask, what is next generation biosecurity?
Yeah. So next generation, if you have, let's just follow the conversation. So you've got a pig and semen program, just like we talked about. You've got a mechanical biosecurity program, just like we talked about. You've got a science-based protocol to handle your trucks. You've got a shower in, shower out for your people. You've got a boot bench for them to work with when they come into the farm. And you've got a D&D room for your supplies. Okay, so you've got that in place. I'd call that probably 2002 biosecurity, to put it on the timeline. Let's go back to Y2K, and we did all that work back in the early 2000s. So that's kind of puts it in perspective. All right, the next hurdle was the airborne risk, because many farms, and a lot of people will remember this, around 2003, 2004, we had farms doing everything right on all the things we've talked about, yet they'd still get infected. They get infected every year, and it'd always be a new virus. And there was always thought that it must be coming in the air. This was way before air filtration was ever considered. But it was very difficult to prove that until the 184 strain came into the conversation, and we showed, one of my graduate students, Dr. Jenny Cho, showed that virus can be excreted in aerosols much more readily than some of the older strains. And we then demonstrated transmission with that virus over about a 9-kilometer airborne route. And so we kind of answered the question, could the virus be spread by air? Because everyone was debating it. And I actually struggled with that a long time, because I was using older viruses and they simply weren't airborne adapted. The virus got smart and it adapted itself to get around some of the mechanical side and was now moving in the air. And that led to developing air filtration, which is a whole nother conversation. But that's the next level of biosecurity people went to after they had their mechanical and their pig and semen program in place. So now, before we take the next step, any questions you have on the airborne? I made it sound real simple, but it was a very, very difficult period of time, and a lot of work went into it to figure that out. And now I think it's quite effective, is the ability to filter incoming air into pig barns using a negative pressure ventilation system and keep the virus out.
And it's still relevant. And then the next phase is the feed, and it's about constantly staying vigilant. And is that some of the things people need to do?
Well, the industry started air filtering, and we saw a drastic reduction in PRRS infections. If you look at the U of M Bob Morrison report that comes out every week, you can really see after about 2011, 2012, the PRRS incidence in those participating systems going down. And it really took a step down. So air filtration made a huge impact. The problem was that there were still these handful of cases where you'd have a farm in a very remote location. It was filtered, it had everything right. There was no breaches that were detected, yet the virus would get in. And, this was just driving us nuts at Pipestone, because we'd had all this effort put into everything I've talked about so far, yet there was this handful of farms. Not a lot of them, but, one's bad enough. And the producers were getting frustrated because they were, now they first they did the truck thing, then they did the air filter thing. They're still getting virus now and then. It was much better than it was. And that's where we had the idea for feed. And we'd shown obviously PED and other viruses in feed. And we've now done some work that shows purge virus can be transmitted through feed. And so we've adapted a plan of feed mitigation at the sow farm level, again, in concert with airborne filtration, with mechanical programs. Again, next generation, moving from the mechanical to the air to the feed. And that's kind of why Gordon and I were thinking about this. We thought that would be a good way to kind of talk about it. Next generation, what's next beyond mechanical and aerosol?
So what needs to change?
Well, I think there still needs to be more if we go back a little bit there, I don't think air filtration is being used to the extent that it should be used. I think there's still some people that have a hard time believing aerosol transmission actually happens, which I find crazy. But I think we've really got to catch up on that. You really can't worry about the feed until you get the air right. You can't worry about the air until you get the trucks right. You know, it's all a step-by-step thing. And so the thing that needs to happen next is people basically have to start reading the literature and start studying what's been done. I'm surprised at the lack of understanding I run into in the industry on some of these very, very old topics that have been around for a long time. So we have to educate. We have to raise awareness that it's not just trucks, it's just not air. There's other things too. So it's education and it's raising awareness.
You can't fix one, you have to fix them all.
You got to fix them all. You could do, you know, a subset but expect a subset of results, right? You're not going to, you know, manage expectations. You handle a subset of these routes and risks very well, but you ignore the other ones. You're not going to get, if, you know, remaining free is your goal, you're probably not going to get there.
Well, just sidebar for a second, Scott. I heard the good news. Your son, Nicholas D, was accepted to med school. So congratulations to him. Why don't you be the proud dad and talk about that for a minute?
Well, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah. Nicholas, yes. Some of your listeners may remember Nicholas. He was on the Swine web report a few weeks ago on his, he did the feed, the holding time in the feed study that we published and we talked about on Swine web, and you had a nice post for him. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So yeah, he just did his master's of public health and he used that feed storage project as his thesis. And now he'll be starting medical school at the University of Minnesota, Duluth, where he wants to go into family medicine in a rural community. So very proud of Nicholas. So thanks for bringing him up. Yeah, my wife and I, Lisa, we're still kind of on a high because of that. So
you get this.
Kids, parents who have successful kids, they know what it's like. You know, it's just makes your year basically.
You can just kind of soak it in and see the growth and evolution and see where his journey leads him.
Yeah, he's got a clear vision what he wants to do, and I was just real happy the 24th of May. He got in, so good news there for us. Thanks for bringing it up.
And back to the original topic. So you guys sent us an editorial, a special issue. What is the significance of the special issue?
Yeah, so the special issue is on feed risk for the movement or the transmission of viruses of veterinary importance. And those of you who understand scientific publication know that every once in a while journals they'll see the need for what they call a special issue on a specific topic. And so, for example, African swine fever, there's been a lot written about African swine fever, and the journals may reach out and say, we got to have a focused, condensed issue summarizing everything new on this topic. Could be influenza, could be a lot of different things. And so in about a year or so ago, the journal Transbounding Emerging Diseases, which actually is one of the highest ranking veterinary journals, contacted me, and they'd seen a lot of the publications already out on feed risk, and they wondered if they could think about doing a special issue and really focus on the topic, which would have been the first time in history that topic would have had its own issue. So this is like breaking new ground. And asked me if I could do that. And I said, well, I'll call my friends up. And so I called a lot of colleagues at the University of Minnesota, Kansas State, South Dakota, Cornell, the SHIC, going into Canada, talked to the CFIA, National Pork Board, AFIA. I kind of reached out to all the people working in that area, and they were very responsive. They said, yes, we will write a paper. And I kind of said, this is what Gordon and I were the guest editors, and we were kind of thinking of this type of a flow. And I was very pleased to see how quickly it got put together and now how well it's being received.
Have you done the waterfall walk at Cornell?
No, I've never been to Cornell. Actually.
Okay.
I have a colleague, Diego Diel, who's at Cornell, and I asked Diego if he'd be interested in putting a paper in. But I've been to the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. That's the closest I've probably been to Cornell.
Okay, you got to see the rolling hills in Cooperstown, and
yeah,
okay, yeah. Cornell has a bunch of waterfalls. There's like a campus tour, so it's amazing. And so, what's the purpose of the special issue?
Special issue, I think, validated the scientific basis of feed risk. And so these journals aren't going to do this if there's just some wishy-washy information. They study everything, and they say this is something that's coming to the top, and we want to focus on it. We want to be the first to do it. We want to bring everything new we can in one condensed version for readers around the world. And so we basically put together literature reviews. We had a couple literature reviews. We had some case about feed risk. We had some case studies about feed risk. We had like 7 or 8 new research publications on new things about feed risk and viruses. So ASF, Seneca, PED. We had all. It wasn't just it was all these different viruses. And so, and then at the end we had, what's the industry doing about it? So we had an article from the CFIA, we had an article from the AFIA and the National Pork Board and the SHIC and those groups. And so what's the industry doing? How are we responding? So it kind of flowed that way. And really the only reason for doing this was to give readers the ability to have a one-stop shop, and really to go into a specific website and find all of this information so they can learn about everything new that's in this area of feed risk. So we're trying to make it easy for people to find the information and then to read it in a logical flow of what did we know before, what's happening in the field as far as cases, what's the new science, and then what's the industry doing. So it's really an educational piece because some people really don't know about this. I'm surprised when I speak a lot at meetings and I kind of ask people, is this something you've seen before or heard about? A lot of people aren't aware of this. And so it's kind of shocking because, we've been banging the drum for 8 years. But this is one way we can educate, we can raise awareness. And so that's really the reason for it. But also for those who are into it, here's kind of a one-stop shop for everything that's new.
So you've been working on this for 8 years. What kind of brought that to your attention? Or
yeah, the original story was to find the PED virus in these feed bins on commercial farms that we were working with in Pipestone, and showing that we could transmit the virus through feed, which had never been done before. Well, bacteria like salmonella or toxins like aflatoxin have been talked about in feed, but nothing had ever been done in viruses. So that was like a January 2014 discovery. And other people got into it, and other people started showing scientifically that, gosh, foot and mouth disease can be spread through feed, African swine fever, Seneca virus, PRRS, PED. It wasn't just one virus, and it wasn't just a single ingredient. It's a brand new area of science that's really never been looked at before. And I find it very rewarding that over that very short period of time, we've already achieved the special issue level of significance.
so this is focused on sow farms. What about wean to finish?
Yeah, good segue. So next generation is, as you say, focused on cell farms, because as I mentioned, a lot of cell farms have pieces of this already in place. They might not have it all, but they've at least got to start. But wean to finish, I don't think there's much at all going on. And we all know that if viruses get into wean to finish populations, you're going to have the neighborhood contaminated at no time for many reasons. And so we're almost thinking that should be called first generation at that level. And we should start looking at what can we do under those conditions to reduce virus spread, just like we did at the South Farm. What are those techniques are applicable to wean to finish? So that's kind of where we just thought first generation made sense. That's a kind of a segue off the next generation. But we got to do that too. We can't simply just focus on the cell farms and not worry about everything else, because that's a lot of viral load. That's a lot of challenge to those cell farms. And none of these biosecurity plans are 100% effective. They can get overwhelmed if environmental challenge is high, if people make mistakes. So it's just kind of continuing to fine tune the process and expand the concept beyond the cell farm. That's first generation wean to finish biosecurity.
Now's the right timing to kind of get some of the conversation going before layman.
I think so. I think we should start talking about this as soon as possible. Maybe that it'll be mentioned at layman. I think it's a very pertinent topic, and layman's always hot on that. So I think, yeah, this is a really good idea. I think talking to Monsi, I think she's kind of thinking down the road already on that this is an important thing to talk about. So this might be mentioned there. So we'll have to stay tuned. But I think this is a good, opening discussion about the next generation concept into the first generation concept.
So what should we be most concerned about, Scott?
Well, African swine fever. Beyond everything else, that's still my number one concern. Focusing back on the topic at hand, though, is if I was a producer, I'd listen to this and I'm going, what am I doing right, and what am I not doing? And where I'm not what I'm not doing, what I'm doing wrong, that's where I would get immediate concern. Okay, I'm doing this right, but I'm not doing this or this or this. So those should be goals for the and then as fast as possible to raise the biosecurity of the cell farm to the next generation.
What should we not overreact about?
PRRS 144 lineage 1C variant, which is a very pathogenic strain, but it's still PRRS. And we're learning how to manage it. We've got data that shows it's really not much different than, say, the 174 variant. There's a lot of overreaction to that virus. And I think it'll take our eyes off the ball a bit if we just panic about it. I think we got to calm down and just do the things we know what to do. We have the tools. We have all the things we need to do. We've got vaccines. We've got biosecurity. We've got testing. We just got to, if we're taking shortcuts, we got to stop that.
You're bringing this to light today. How do we keep educating ourselves?
Reading. We have to become better readers of the literature. And I know that's challenging, but I'm just, every time I give a talk on the feed risk, for example, I'm just amazed that sometimes people haven't even heard about this before. And it's not that we haven't, we've published many papers, people have given many talks. It's been out in the press for many years, but I'm surprised at the lack of awareness of this topic. Not just the United States. I think that I do international congresses too, mostly virtual now, of course, but I'm always asking the question, how many of you have heard about this before? And it really is quite a few hands go up. So we had to be better readers. We got to be better students of the literature and really look at the science and not spend time blogging. We got to spend more time reading.
Reading and taking action.
Taking action, yeah. Discussing it. If I was a producer, I'd ask my veterinarian, what's new on this topic? And hopefully he or she, they're kind of the gatekeepers of the new knowledge as part of their job. Hopefully he or she can talk about it intelligently and kind of say, well, you're at this level, you need to be here. This is what we need to do. Let's make a plan and see if we can get there. So the vet on the farm every day is still the liaison to a lot of this information, because if you're not trained in how to understand this stuff, it does get confusing.
And let's be proactive on it. Let's make something happen. Let's learn, let's educate ourselves and take an opportunity to stay ahead of this.
Definitely. The information's there. There's no mysteries to what to do. We have all the information we need. We have all the protocols. We know the routes of transmission. If we discover a new one, like we did with feed, we'll share it and we'll adapt. That's a good example of, well, there's not much beyond aerosol. Well, there was, and we figured it out. And now there's ways to reduce that risk. So it's an evolutionary process. It's a living, breathing, dynamic situation that changes as we learn more information. So just got to keep up with what's new.
So what can we do next?
Depends where you are. It depends. If you've got a strong mechanical and aerosol plan, but you don't have a feed plan, you should study that, because there's plenty of things you can do, such as additives in the diets or holding time to reduce that risk. If you don't have an aerosol plan and you're in a pig dense region, you probably should think about that, because that's been around now for so long. It's like 2004 when we started studying aerosol air filtration. That's old news. And so I would say I agree that some environments it's more challenging because of the ventilation requirements. So I know it's not everybody can do that, but those that are able to do it and aren't, I think are just setting themselves up for repeated outbreaks, independent of everything they're doing on the mechanical side.
Other than Swine Web, where can people find the paper?
The special issue is it's available online. It can be found really if you just go to Transboundary and Emerging Diseases. That's a website. You can find it there. If you go to PubMed, it's there. If you ask me for it, I'll send you a link. So there's all sorts of ways you can find it. And each of the papers in it are individual publications too. And so if you don't want the whole thing, but you want one of the 17, you can find those too. So it's out there. We pay a lot of money to have these journals, publications called open access, where people can get the whole article rather than have to pay some money for just, more than just the abstract. So people just have to go look for it, or at least ask me and I'll send it to them.
Should this keep us up at night?
It should. It should, because if we get ASF into North America, you cannot find a better way to move it around from place to place other than pigs and trucks with pigs, is through the feed. And it should keep us up all night, because we're moving stuff in from other countries that are ASF positive that we've shown that harbor the virus very well, such as soybean meal. And there's very little effort at the federal level to stop that. And that's why the industry is taking the lead in developing these responsible import plans for ingredients. But it keeps me up at night all the time, and everybody should be worried about it.
Was there a defining moment or moment of clarity during the study?
Well, I think the original PD work we did in 2014, when we showed transmission through consumption of feed from the bins that were contaminated, that was a big day. The ability of other scientists to replicate that work and expand it to other viruses, to me, that was like a big, big day, because it's not just Scott messing around. It's others are showing that it's repeatable, and that's very important in science. I think it's the request for the special issue was a big day, because that said to me that, gosh, the scientific community is taking note of this, and they think it's something they want to talk about, and that's a big day, because that raises that validates that this just isn't a bunch of swag. This is real science. So there have been a couple moments along the way, Jim, that have given me some hope that we made a contribution and it'll continue to help as more and more people learn about it.
Do you have any final thoughts?
First, just thank you for the time. We have to, and it's a job, one of my jobs, we have to raise awareness of this. We have to challenge the industry. We have to, argue with people. Let's get to the next generation level. I don't think there's much of a debate anymore. Let's just get it done. We have to, continue to challenge people, because we got to do this together as a team. We can't do it just with a few of us here and there. So to me, it's a challenge to the industry, saying we've got all the science and let's use it. Why aren't we using the information?
Well, thank you, Dr. Scott D, for joining us on In Swine Versation.
My pleasure, Jim. Thanks for the invitation to Swine Versation.
People look forward to updates, and we'll connect again soon.
Anytime.